Yeah, so I have Evgeny here with me, and we're here to talk. It's kind of unstructured, not really sure what we're going to talk about, but it's TOC related, theory of constraints. Some
Yeah.
stuff, a body of knowledge that Eli Goldratt brought to the world, which he gained from previous people and built on top of it, of course. And you and I are the same in the sense that we never got to speak to. I'm assuming you never got to speak to Eli Goldratt.
No, I did speak to many of his students. No.
I see. Maybe you more than I did, but I got one that you saw, which is how you found me on YouTube.
Yes.
Yeah. So who else did you speak to?
Well, so back when I was kind of getting interested after reading The Goal and looking, at all the various social networks that I could subscribe to hear more about it, I found a Facebook group. I don't remember which one, where one of his advisors was organizing a meeting at the Goldratt house in Israel for all the people who wanted to remember him. And it was, I think, 2 or 3 years after he died. It was 2014, I believe. So I sent an email and I said, can I come as well? So I went there and I met many of his people who knew him really well, including Rami Goldratt, his son, and his son-in-law as well. So yeah, and then
there?
Sorry?
How many people were there that day?
Well, not that many. I think maybe 20 or 30, and everybody was talking, telling stories about.
So you were the only one there who didn't know him personally. Everyone else knew him personally.
I think so, yes.
That's an amazing opportunity you had. That's really awesome. But you happened to be in the same country where all that was happening.
Yeah, my luck.
Yeah, I'm far away. And I didn't even know about him until more recently. Like that, I wasn't aware of him until after this point.
Yeah, so I believe later we went to visit his grave as well, like make a small service to remember. And then a year after, if I remember correctly, it was 2015. I also went to the Berlin TOC ICO conference, where I met the same people who I could say hello to, but also many new people. And I even I remember there was one professor. I'm really bad at names, but there was one professor who is quite like how do you say it with respect? His age is like more than twice mine, and he was presenting a presentation at one of the keynotes, saying how he can solve the real estate crisis or something like that, and he opened it for questions from the audience, and I was really asking him some tough questions and doubting his solution, and it got a lot of attention. It was quite funny. Some people came up to me later and said, like, how come are you arguing with someone who's like twice your age and has been doing this for 20 years and you're, anyway.
You're saying, how can you have the confidence to contradict somebody who supposedly knows more?
And you know how, because if it doesn't make sense, if it's not logical, then what you're supposed to do, and that's my approach in life, is when somebody gives you something illogical, you're supposed to poke holes in it and make sure that
this is science.
Well, you need to make sure that the person who is presenting the idea can defend his idea by explaining the logic that maybe you're missing. Right?
Yes,
because you may not know all the
criticisms. You were asking questions that to you seemed like there's some gaps, which maybe he could fill, but he has to do it.
Yes. Well, he tried. So we also talked in between sessions and things.
Yeah.
And then even more than that, we had the huge privilege to get invited by Rami Goldratt to the conference that Rami was organizing in Utah. So they said, you buy the airplane tickets and we arrange everything else. It was really, really a privilege to go there, to attend not just the conference, which was several days, but also all the dinners that involved all these people from around the world. It was like an amazing experience. So I didn't meet Eli Goldratt directly, but I did have a lot of interactions with a lot of amazing people that were really very close to him.
I really only have one person that I connected with, and that's the person you saw, Eli Schragenheim.
Yes,
and I've been valuing our discussions a lot. I got to see a lot of I got to learn a lot of things that I don't think I could have learned from books or videos, by people that directly talk to him,
Of course, but also Eli is he was quite involved in the book that explains the 6 questions of how to measure technology. If you heard of that, so
you mean Eli Schragenheim?
Yes, Eli Schragenheim, together with Goldratt, they wrote the book. I believe it's necessary but not sufficient, and it's one of these, theory of constraints. If we just go to the basics, many people just stop at reading the goal, but there's a lot more depth in it.
Sure.
There's a lot more. There's like an ecosystem of ideas in there that is much broader than just manufacturing and just finding the constraint and subordinating, and like the 5 focusing steps. The 5 focusing steps is one of the tools that is presented in the goal. And there are many other things that are presented in the goal that don't get any attention much.
So I was just going to say, I wanted to add to what you're saying. And I think that's a very worthwhile topic to hit hard on this podcast. If not this one, maybe another one we do in the future. I think we should talk about what TOC actually is. In my conception, and this is coming from Eli Goldratt's mouth, TOC is the scientific approach to organizations. So first, it sounds like maybe you disagree, but let me finish. So first,
I could focus it a little bit.
Okay, yeah. Focus it a little bit. Go ahead.
So in one of his lectures on video, Goldratt has told the story of how he was asked to summarize TOC into one sentence. You saw that one?
And then I saw one where he said into one word.
Yes.
And the word was
into
focus.
One word. Yes.
So go on. What was the sentence?
No, the word was focus.
Oh, that was it. So it was one sentence and then he went to one word. I do remember that video, yeah.
Yes, and he wrote, and in that video he's also reading from the introduction to the TOC handbook. Do you have that one? It's like a huge book. And in the introduction, he explains why focus is, why you can derive all of the ideas that fall under the umbrella of TOC from that one word.
Okay. So I think we can go even deeper, and this is all still coming from Eli Goldratt's mouth. This is not an insight from me. This is all from him. So he says, he built on the knowledge from before him, and he names a few people in the business management world, but he also names a few people who we might call scientists, pure scientists, rather than anyone that was doing anything in business. So Isaac Newton, okay? And I mean, even in Isaac Newton's time, we know him today as a physicist, or the first physicist. In his time, he was known as a natural philosopher who studies nature. I'm just going to call him a philosopher or a scientist, okay? He not only did stuff in physics, he did things like created a whole field of math so that he could do the physics. But I think he did something even bigger than both those two things. I think he described to us a field, let's say, that is even deeper than physics. It's the logic of physics, and it's not just physics. It's the logic of everything. It's cause and effect. Okay, so what he said was, for any system of parts, they have interconnections. They have cause and effect relationships. Of course, you can imagine a system of parts where there's no connections. And in that scenario, you would be able to say the sum of the parts is equal to the parts.
To the system.
Equal to, well, so let me say the opposite one that everyone knows. We say the sum does not equal the parts.
The sum is greater usually, because when you take the dependencies into account, then the sum of the parts, the system itself, is greater than the parts that comprise. It depends. Again, are there dependencies or are there no dependencies? For example, if you take a system like a car engine, right? Is it greater than all the pipes and all the different metal parts that comprise it, or is it lesser? Well, most people would argue it's greater because it's a system, it has a purpose, and it has all of these dependencies working together. And
that system that we designed, yes, it's definitely greater.
and in many cases, people, they try to decompose systems into parts in order to understand them, but what they forget to decompose is the dependencies. They forget to look at the dependencies. And again, in the book, The Goal, which was written in 1984, I believe, like when I was 4 years old, even before the 5 focusing steps, where you do all the constraint juggling, there are 2 things that come before that, and that is you need to look at the system as a system of dependent events. And if you don't have a system of dependent events, like you say, you cannot use this approach. But when you do have a system of dependent events, it is important that you look at it and analyze the dependencies, because you probably already know the parts. Like in a manufacturing plant, you probably already know the stations. But what you need to analyze is the dependencies between the stations, like the handoffs of inventory in manufacturing case, or in projects. Again, it's work being done by people, but then they hand off work from one person to another person. If you have a collection of people, each one of them doing completely independent work, all of the ideas of, for example, critical chain, they don't apply in that kind of environment. So it is very important to notice that when Goldratt explains in some of his videos, he explains the difference of the word complexity, how most people understand the word complexity, and how he and many scientists look at the word complexity, which something that is complex means that it has many independent things that don't have, what's the word he uses? Degrees of freedom, right? There are many degrees of freedom. So if you have many degrees of freedom, it's more complex than when you have very few degrees of freedom, or none, or one, basically. Because when you have just 1 degree of freedom, that means that all of the parts are connected between them. And that is where TOC comes in and tells you an axiom that says, if they are all connected, then by pulling on one of them, you're going to pull everything.
So the way Isaac Newton said it was, as the number of parts in a system, the number of interconnected, the number of cause and effect relationships between the parts in a system, as that number increases, the number of parts governing the whole system decreases until you get to a limit of 1, which is a system where there is 1 constraint. And I think when you understand that kind of logic in the deeper way, for one, it helps you do things like, there's people that make this mistake of thinking constraints are bad, let's get rid of constraints.
Yes.
That's not what anyone was ever saying, but you can get confused like that very easily when you don't understand the foundation of all this logic. And then it's easy to, let's say, misunderstand that, okay, you could also have two constraints. There's scenarios where that could happen. And then there's, things like we're the ones designing the constraints in a sense. We're setting the buffers. We're setting up big enough buffers or not big enough buffers, stuff like that. It's all, it can be intentional and should be, obviously. Like when we're making a computer system, the programmers, the people making the system are designing that in there. Like they look at a part, they're like, we do not want this to be the bottleneck. So have enough buffer there and so on until, you get what I mean?
Yeah, that's because there is a difference between a bottleneck and a constraint in the sense that Eli Goldratt meant it. When he said constraint, he said so he had like two meanings. One of the meanings in the goal is something that is already a bottleneck is probably your constraint, and you can use it as a control point, as a leverage point for managing the whole system, the flow through the whole system. But then later, when maybe that item is no longer your bottleneck anymore, you can still continue using it as your control point, as your leverage point. But people who read further into the theory of constraints, all the different books and everything, they understand that when Eli said constraint, he more the meaning was, for example, in the focusing steps, the first step is identify the constraint, right? Now, the word identify, most people think about the word find because it's already there and I need to locate it, and it's probably the bottleneck that is stopping the whole system from having a full flow. Fine. But later, identify is also a synonym for the word choose. So it doesn't necessarily have to be your bottleneck, but you can choose something to be your constraint in order to have one control point, as we discussed earlier in the word complexity, that one control point that when you pull on it, you can change the whole system. If you increase the capacity of that constraint, the whole system is the flow through the whole system has an increase in capacity. Now, you need to be wary that you don't increase the capacity in such a way that your control point is lost, and now you have some other place that is a bottleneck that is preventing you from controlling the system using your control point. Either you choose that new place as your new control point, as your new constraint, or you realize that you had some capacity ceiling that you could go up to, but then once you start going over, you start creating chaos in the whole system because everything is becoming bottlenecks over bottlenecks.
Yeah, the wandering bottleneck effect.
Yes, right. which is also mentioned in the goal and explained quite well. So that book explains all of this.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to describe here is that TOC is the scientific approach, and I think a big failure people have is, like you said, they only learn things at a superficial level. They kind of think they grasp it all because they understood a few things, and then where they face trouble, and you brought this up. This is something you wanted to talk about today. I want to talk about it too. Where they face trouble is when they're now meeting with another person, another TOC practitioner or whatever, who, let's say, also only has a superficial understanding of things. And when they have a disagreement, they actually don't have the proper methods to resolve the disagreement. And the proper methods are the kind of things like, so just to do a tiny bit of example, that person that asked you, what are you doing contradicting this man that's much older than you? That is the opposite thinking of what should be happening. They should be like praising you for doing that, and everyone should have been doing it.
So, well, there's a caveat
for everybody.
There's a caveat here. So let me tell you some of my journey, because at some point I was also a novice. I read the goal. I got like excited from learning these ideas, and then I went ahead and tried to implement them. And of course, I failed miserably multiple times. And later, more insights and more understanding came. So maybe today I can implement them a little bit better. But still, it's very difficult. This logic, right, that we are talking about, it's very difficult when you're actually meeting other people and you need to explain it to them or persuade them to change their ways. Or you need to show them the logic, right? Like the thinking processes, which is part of the theory of constraints, is creating a tree that shows you the necessity and the sufficiency logic. Now, it's great, but it's very, very difficult to actually do. And once you did it, it's very, very difficult to convey to other people. And I actually have some practice at that. So I tried, I was a consultant. Now I'm an employee, but I was a consultant for about a decade in a field called DevOps, which is helping software companies mostly better use the public cloud for deploying their applications there and configuring them in various automated ways and things like that. So that's like DevOps in a nutshell. But it also has this whole concept of helping developers who are writing the applications to better talk to people who know more about the infrastructure, like the public cloud, for example. So I met many, many companies. And at some point when I was kind of more confident in my theory of constraints understanding and practice, I tried to do a session with some companies where I would try to find their problems. So I would get the team leaders of the software developers in a small room with a whiteboard, and I would ask them to describe their problems. So if you know about the thinking processes, it's called the undesirable effects, UDs. Yeah. So, and they would tell me, well, this doesn't work, that doesn't work, this is bad, we constantly need to fight with this, all kinds of reasons. And I would write them on the board, right? And then I would try to go several levels deeper. Like if you know from Toyota, there's the 5 whys. So in theory of constraints, it's very similar. You also have these 5 whys, but you don't go at a straight line 5 deep. You go in a tree where you also, while diving into the problems that cause the problems, you are also trying to connect between them so that you find that one root problem that is the root conflict that is causing everything else. And once you solve that, everything else resolves. So I was trying to do that. I was trying to do that live in front of people and drawing it on a board. And then because I was doing it with more than one team leader, the next team leader that would come in, I would read from the board, explain them what was here, and I would ask them if they agree or if they could add something or if they disagree, right? So I had these opportunities to do all these things because I was a consultant, and basically companies would ask me to come in and help them solve their problems. Even very big companies. In one of the very, very big companies, I did all this work of interviewing everybody, all the team leaders, and building this tree of cause and effect, and then presenting it to the team leaders as well as the management above them. And I was basically kicked out of the room. In another very, very big company, they did a whole offsite for the whole company. Where
tell me what they said to you when they kicked you out of the room. Like, what was their criticism?
Well, they said, this is nonsense. You don't understand anything of how things work here.
It was their words.
I was quoting the team leaders, exactly. but the management was so disconnected from what was actually happening, right? That whenever I was an advocate, I don't care. I'm not the team leader. The team leaders may be afraid of speaking up in that kind of culture. It depends on the culture of the company. But when I'm talking, I don't care because I don't work there, right? So I was just rephrasing the same things that I was hearing from the team leaders And the management was just saying, you know what, this is nonsense. This doesn't work. This doesn't help us. We cannot change any of this. So it's very difficult to find a way as a person to present that to other people. And just one more thing I want to mention is that this idea that I had recently, and that's why I told you I want to talk about it here, about resistance to change was a big topic with the TOC as well. There's a lot of snippets about it, like the metrics for resistance to change with the mermaid and the crocodile and the crutches and the pot of gold. And there are many other I don't know how to say, like subjects that touch on this point of people resisting to change. And recently I tried thinking, why is it that people who read the goal, they don't usually, most people I heard of, they don't usually resist anything that is written there. They agree. Like, why does that happen? Right? And I thought, I think I know the reason. And the reason is, like you said, is the scientific approach. And what is the scientific approach? You can go way, way further than just Newton. You can go to Socrates. And what did Socrates do? He had a way to cause a change in a person's mind, not by persuading them, right? But what did he do?
He would ask questions, let them answer.
He would ask questions. Answers. Yes, he would ask them questions. And then if you look at the goal, exactly, and that's what Jonah would do. And that's why the Jonah program by Goldratt was teaching people to ask questions, especially the Jonah,
and arrive at your own conclusions.
Especially the Jonah of Jonah program. It's not your own conclusions, because the questions are directing you. Okay. They are giving you clues to what you should be thinking. Or if you are incorrect in your assumptions, the question is going to tell you that maybe you are not entirely correct. And that's, if you read the goal, that's how it's built. I mean, the answers come in a chapter or two after, but first you're posed with the question. You, as the reader, are thinking about it, and then if you thought the wrong things, the wrong answers, later you are getting shown how these answers are wrong, and you get to polish the answer to the question, right? And I'm thinking, and this is an idea I had very recently. I'm thinking that is a good way. The Socratic approach, the questions, that is a very good way to cause change in others. Instead of telling them, you should be asking them.
So I'd like to say something real quick about that. I said this recently to my daughter. We were talking about some bad relationships between people, like romantic relationships. And I wanted to explain something. There's people who, they have thoughts in their head in the form of statements, and they're void of any question that caused the statement. Like, the statement is really an answer to a question, but it's divorced from any question. And then there's people, they're full of ideas in their head, thoughts, statements, but they are answers to questions, and they know the questions, they're linked. And actually, for me, and I think this is for pretty much everybody who's in this category, I really remember the question more than the answer. I don't care about the answer that much. The answer changes more often than the questions do.
Exactly.
The other way to think of it is, as long as you can remember the question, you can reformulate the answer. Reinvent the answer every time if you like.
But you also need to keep that flexibility of changing the answer. Because, and Eli talked about it as well. I believe the quote is, never say I know, right? And why did he say that? Because the answers might be wrong. And they can change. And if you're flexible enough in your thinking, and you have, people call it an open mind, then you can change the answers. But the questions are still there. It's not like the question is not important.
Right. So just to be clear to everyone listening, even that concept goes all the way back to Socrates.
Yes.
And we know it by the name fallibility today. The word didn't exist back then. The way Socrates said it was, I know that I know nothing. But here's that's kind of confusing. So let's clarify for everyone. I fallibly know that I infallibly know nothing. So it's like saying I have imperfect knowledge that I don't have any perfect knowledge. And so Goldratt was saying, never say you know. He means never say you infallibly know.
Yeah.
Meaning that you can't be wrong. Never say you can't be wrong. Always be ready to change your answer to a question. Although I would say further, sometimes our questions are wrong and we need better questions. So be ready to change our questions too.
Yes.
And everything we're saying here is under the umbrella of the scientific approach. No physicist could do physics without all of these things. And just to be clear to everyone too, people see Einstein as like a great physicist. Maybe they see him as a standalone kind of thing. Like he kind of did it on his own. He stood on the shoulders of previous giants. Okay. He's maybe added like 2% to the whole package. He couldn't have done it without, Newton's previous theory of gravity and Maxwell's previous theory of electromagnetism. And, I don't think he could have I don't think he could have done it without lots of dialogue between Einstein and other physicists for the previous decade before he led to that, And of course,
exactly.
Somebody like Einstein, before he even got to the level of, starting to think of questions no one thought of before, he first went through, going through school and becoming, going through years of training under other physicists who were, 30 years older than him. And he's learning how they think. And those dudes were doing it with other dudes before. All the way, chain reaction from, Goldratt to whoever was before him to Einstein, Richard Feynman, all the way back to Newton. I think it kind of died before that, though, because, it was the Middle Ages.
Even though I'm not amazingly well versed in history, but even though many of these people like Einstein and maybe others, they usually had some teachers which they rebelled against, because these teachers were very inflexible in their thought. They were very fixed in their answers. And that's what caused some of these great people to rebel against the teacher and try to find a better answer. So, and most of these people, they were very like Copernicus, for example, right? They were ridiculed when they came up with a new answer to an existing question, because everybody already has the answer. You don't need to come up with a new answer.
To go further, Socrates was killed by the state, and their charge was he's infecting the minds of the young people. So yes, I get what you mean. Everyone was going against us. So you mentioned culture a few moments ago. A big part of this is culture, and even in the world of physicists, I'm not trying to claim that they're all doing it great. Okay, so just as an example, Richard Feynman, when he was invited to help figure out what went wrong with the one of the rockets we sent in space that crashed. Part of that the way it all went down was one of the people working for NASA knew what the problem was. That person didn't feel comfortable telling anyone. So she had to figure out a secret way to get this information on a piece of paper, hand it to Feynman, for then Feynman to create a way to tell everyone about this without letting them know that she said it, she exposed it. All this game had to be done. Why? Because they weren't doing the scientific approach. This is the opposite of the scientific approach. And this is a bunch of scientists working for NASA. What I mean to say is, it's even in the best places, it's not as good as it could be. It's not a bunch of Richard Feynmans. I think he had it very well, but everyone around him wasn't doing so great.
It works in both ways. So one of the ways that you describe right now is when somebody's afraid to speak up. But there's also another way that happens, is that in cultures, in organizations that I've seen in many organizations. As I said, I was a consultant and I was consulting with many organizations. I've seen it many times. Sometimes somebody doesn't speak up because they already tried to speak up and they got hit on the head. And not necessarily by a manager, sometimes by a colleague. And it removes all motivation to speak up in the future.
Or that was raised a certain way, I would say.
Well, yes, but I have seen it in organizations as a systemic organization disease.
We have systemic problems in our entire culture worldwide.
Yeah, yes, I agree. But
all of us are ending up in these organizations.
Let's just focus on organizations. So, in some organizations, I believe that this is an intentional effort that can be done by managers in order to make sure that even when people ask stupid questions or raise stupid objections, they're never being shut off, never being shut down. They're always their opinion is always respected and is always
shame added. Has no place in science.
And their opinion is always added to the list of considerations that needs to be taken and verified, because in science you have to verify things. Everything is a hypothesis until you verified it, until you tested it. So in some organizations, what happens is that managers are not intentionally making sure that this happens. And in some even worse cases, they're actually making sure it doesn't happen. So when somebody is trying to bring up an idea and his colleague disagrees with him, a manager would immediately say, I don't want to hear disagreements here in this company. And then he shuts both of them down.
Yes.
And that is a very toxic culture that grows out of these interactions. Eventually, culture grows out of interactions between colleagues. And when these kinds of things happen, and they happen too frequently without people being aware of them, it really poisons everything. And very soon, all the good people leave the company, the organization, whatever. Only the toxic people remain, and eventually the company withers and dies.
Yeah. So I would like to say a couple things about that. The first thing, small kind of thing. I would say that toxicity that is in these organizations, it was brought to the organization from somewhere else first. And basically it's from your parents. We're getting this from our parents, then we go into organizations and we bring it with us. So a major problem that organizations have is, suppose there is an organization that is doing better than this, they have to figure out how do we assimilate new people to let them leave that nonsense from their past and let it not affect this organization. So just a tiny little example. If you were raised in a family where your parents are always lying about you, always doing bad things to you, things like that, you might grow up and have this conception that everyone's always against me, which that's actually what they've seen and that's what they've experienced. They end up in a company, it's not the case that way, but they come up with those theories anyway from just habits, mental habits. So an organization who's isn't that way has a really big task of, I guess for one thing, try to find people that don't have those problems. But if you do end up with them, how to get the person to think, hey, I'm not like those people. Don't treat me like the way you're just kind of assuming your parents treated you, so everyone's treating you that way. I don't know how to really resolve that besides maybe having therapists in your company and everyone having therapy. The other thing I wanted to say.
So let me give you an idea of how to resolve it. And I think it's a win-win solution. So I'll give you an example. Relatively recently, I had some interaction with a new employee, a new software developer, who was, I don't know where he worked before. I doubt it comes from home, from his parents. Maybe, but I think it came from previous jobs he had.
Okay.
And he had very low self-esteem in general, but he also had very low confidence about doing the things or exploring, right? So the task was explore, research a thing, how to do it, and that was the task. Just explore it and then make some assumptions. And he was very there was a lot of lack of confidence there. So I had a chat with him because I was reviewing the work. And he was saying, I don't know what your standards are. I should probably get it perfect the first time, etc., etc., etc. And me as more of a leader, you could say, in the company, I was very proud of myself after for telling him, no, it is fine to write something that will not work, that is wrong. It's okay, because we will fix it later. Because right now we don't know what we don't know. You need to start with something. Don't try to get it to perfect. Just try to get it to something that we can test. And then he's like, I'm not sure it's going to be good. And I'm like, I am sure it's not going to be good. Yes. I am sure of that. Yes. And it's okay, right? So when you as a leader in a company, when you are doing something like this to your new employees or existing employees, it's a win-win because you get a good feeling that you gave the correct culture to the new employee. And the employee understands that he has a safety net. He cannot fail, right?
Yeah. What you're doing there is you're trying to fix something in our culture, which is shame is rampant in our culture, and you're trying to say no shame.
Yeah, I'm trying to say, I will blame you if you will not try. But if you try and you fail, I will not blame you. I will praise you for failing because now we learn something and you can try something else and you can fail again. And it's fine to fail.
The scientific approach right now.
Exactly.
We have to start with a testable theory. It doesn't matter that much how close it is to the truth right now. You have to start with something so that you can iterate. If you don't even start, you can't iterate.
Yes.
So the other thing I wanted to say, you mentioned, shame gets in the way. Organizations are doing shame, and even if they're not, people are self-shaming themselves. And this is getting in the way of truth-seeking and getting in the way of the scientific approach, getting in the way of people coming to agreements that they should be coming to. There's another thing that gets in the way that I think is a lot more difficult to deal with, and fewer people have talked about it and figured it out. Eli Goldratt talked about it. Richard Feynman talked about it. So the way Feynman talked about it was, you got to be careful when you're listening to some scientist or whoever, and let's suppose you see them as a very great man. You got to be careful to not just believe them because they're so much smarter than you. The phrases you might use here is that, that's an appeal to authority. You could be doing that unintentionally. There's also another phrase that works here is confirmation bias. So I'm pretty sure this happened to Eli Goldratt, and that explains to me why he talked about it. everyone talks about him. The word they use about him, one of the words they use about him when they describe him in a sentence is charisma. Okay?
Yeah.
Charisma, and they always say it in a good way. He's charismatic, that's good. Charisma can be very bad. Can be. Hitler was charismatic. Okay? Where it can be bad is if it interrupts the scientific approach. If me as a student listening to Eli Goldratt and I see his charisma, I see how much he believes in his idea, and I say, okay, well, he must be right, even if it's subconscious and I don't have those words in my head. I don't put in the effort of criticizing him the way I would have if he was somebody else who is 30 years younger and not named Eli Goldratt. How do you, for yourself, make sure you're not committing this mistake? I've done it in the past. I've done it. There was a person I thought he was really smart. I remember one time disagreeing with him, and I thought, oh, well, he must be right. 20 years later, I'm like, wait a minute, I was right. How do we avoid that? I'm not sure. And then how do we make sure the people listening to us don't do it to us? I think that's a harder problem than the shame one.
It's an excellent question. It's more about personal than organizational, but I've seen it attempted. I mean, I've seen it many times when I'm talking to people who are trying to sell me something, maybe their company, their idea, their product, whatever, and they would use these techniques of appealing to authority, of telling me, well, we have the US government as our customer, and Biden wrote us a check yesterday and whatever. And I'm like, okay, I don't care.
Yeah,
I don't care about that.
Your sales tactics.
I care about the value it brings me. So from a lot of the ideas that I got from Eli Goldratt, one of the amazing ideas he has in the satellite program, he explains it in the marketing and sales presentation, is that the product that you're selling, how do you set the price? Right? You don't set the price by the amount of work you had to do. It's a very stupid way to do it.
Value to the customer.
Yes, the customer sets the price. The customer is appraising the value he's going to get. And of course, if you can explain to him the value that he's going to get in a way that he didn't even think of, it's excellent, right? Because he's not going to think about all the value he's going to get. So you could explain to him, for example, in the satellite program, Goldratt gives an example of a oil refinery, I believe, the core refiner or something like that. And the value that the customer is going to get is they're going to get it on time within a specific amount of time, while all the competition is going to be late and are going to give that component to their refinery like 2 or 3 months late. And you could translate those months into millions and millions of dollars, and that is the value that the customer is going to get. So the customer is not going to think of these things on their own. So let me get back to what I was saying. What I learned from Goldratt is I'm always trying to see what value am I getting when somebody is trying to pitch me an idea or sell me a product or a service or whatever. Is this something that I actually need? Is this something that is going to make my life better, right? And in many cases, that's where my critical mind starts to work over time and tries to poke holes into this idea and ask questions. And many people who are trying to sell me things are getting upset when I'm asking them questions like this because they don't have the answers. But
well, yeah. And they say things like, the most when you said sales tactics, the standard one they give is trust me.
Well,
why should I trust you?
Nobody falls for that anymore, I hope.
Well, they do it a lot, and when they do it, I don't think they realize what they're doing. It's just
but a person who is not aware of what I just said, when somebody tells him trust me, he's going to ask them, how many years have you been doing this? because he's going to look for authority.
Yes.
And that is the wrong thing to look for.
Yes.
You need to look for, I don't care about trust. I care about what value am I getting?
Yes.
I mean, cut all the BS. Give me the distilled value that I'm going to get from whatever it is that you're trying to sell me. I don't care about your authority or whatever. Or so that, I think that's the way you should approach such conversations or such ideas. When you are back to your question, when you're reading some idea or listening to some idea and you're really persuaded by it, maybe the person is very charismatic, like myself. But what you have to do is, am I getting value from this? Am I getting some new insights or whatever it is that I decided that I want to get from this? If yes, then maybe I can ask some questions around it, or synthesize it better so that I could buy the product or like purchase the idea, if there's a word for that. I don't know the word. So, and if not, then it doesn't matter that it's some kind of Hindu guru teaching you yoga, because I don't care about yoga. I don't want to be flexible or walk on nails, right? That's not a value that I want to get in my life.
I'd like to give one extra pointer there. So when you're considering somebody else's idea, and let's say you already know that you recognize that person as a great person, so you should already know at this point that there's danger of appeal to authority subconsciously from you to them. In that scenario, a good question to ask is, let's say I put X amount of effort in trying to see holes in the idea. How much effort would I have put in if it was somebody else I don't know, or somebody else I think is stupid? And hopefully the answer is the same amount. It shouldn't be different.
It's a lot of effort though, and you probably are not thinking about these kinds of efforts when you're
trying to get people
consuming ideas.
Yeah. I'm trying difficult. To keep people away from autopilot.
It's difficult to think all the time. It's much easier to be on autopilot. And even Eli talked about it multiple times when he said about why should an organization change inertia, or is it's such more comfortable to remain where you are, and to, with the set of ideas and set of practices that you already have. It's a comfort zone. Why should you leave the comfort zone? And when you're trying to cause somebody to change, you need to give them very, very good reasons to leave their comfort zone. And if you don't give them these reasons in such a way that they understand it, and like we talked before, the Socratic Method, I believe, is a very powerful tool there. If you can cause them in their minds to come up with ideas that tell them, look, this comfort zone is not very comfortable anymore. If you can do that, then you can make them move. You can make them change. You can slice through that resistance to change more easily. It's still going to be difficult, but perhaps you can do that.
Goldratt talked about in the satellite program, Goldratt satellite program. There was 8 sections. One of them was selling, customer selling. And he described this method of, I don't think he used the words, the Socratic method, but it looked like the Socratic method to me. Because what he described is, instead of telling the customer, here's how we're going to get around whatever potential flaw in this idea, you ask questions to let them come up with it, even though you already know the answer. And then now, and I think he would use these words, I'm not really sure. It's a bit manipulative, maybe. Let them think they come up with the idea themselves. And then I think he even said, act surprised that they came up with it when none of that was happening.
What was that author of the book, Neil Rackham, right? Spin Selling. he was mentioning that he learned that from a giant. He learned many things from many giants, which he recognized by name in many different cases. One of them was Spin Selling by Neil Rackham, which is a book. I haven't read it, but according to what Goldratt described, the book is a way to listen to the customer more than you are trying to pitch them ideas and features and benefits and stuff. Yes. And so, in addition to what you said, but when you're trying to sell something to a customer, you're not supposed to talk about yourself and say how great you are. What you are supposed to do, according to this spin selling methodology, according to Goldratt, who described it, is that you should allow the customer explain his pains, but you have already done the homework and you know the solution to them. And that's where you come in, and you perhaps even tell the customer their pains, or at least agree with them. And then eventually you give them the solution to those in the form of your product or service. And that's a very powerful way to sell. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing stuff. So I remember over email, you said you have a solution to this problem of, people failing to come to agreement in these organizations. Is that something you already described a little bit, or you haven't talked about it yet?
Yeah, I think the idea of the Socratic questions is the one that I really had in mind. Some weeks ago, I started writing about theory of constraints on LinkedIn and getting into discussions with various people. Most of them, some of them were trying to pitch their books. So whatever I was writing, they were negating me because it's not in their book, so it must be wrong. But this thing came to me that there is something magical in the book The Goal, the way that it causes you to agree with it. And I believe it's the Socratic method, and by that I mean the questions. So I tried that in LinkedIn. I tried in some of the comments of some other people who were pitching an idea. I was writing, okay, but I was writing a set of questions that are leading. It's like an objection to your idea. I object to your idea, but I'm not telling you you're wrong. I'm asking you questions, but what about this? What about that? What about this? And if it's true, then what about that? And what about this? And the person reading that after, as a follow-up to his original idea, is like, oh yeah, these are the missing pieces that I didn't describe. And either they have a good description for those missing pieces, or those missing pieces are holes in their original idea, which makes it stand on a very shaky ground and it all falls apart. So, and that's a way to kind of make someone who has an idea, by asking them questions, to distill that idea, to make it more focused, to make it more correct, to make it more, to have thicker bases that it stands on, instead of shaky foundations that it stands on. And it's difficult. It's difficult to come up with these questions because your instinct immediately is you want to tell them where they're wrong.
Okay.
But you should stop yourself.
Yes.
You should write all the things they're wrong, and then you should rephrase all of them into questions.
Yeah.
In such a way that you're leading the person, right? And the effect of that is that you're causing the change in their mind. If you were just writing you're wrong, you're basically telling that other person, this Evgeny is an idiot and he just thinks you're wrong and you shouldn't listen to him. But when you write questions, it's like you're asking him to elaborate on his idea. But then once he starts down the path of your questions, he realizes his idea is standing on shaky foundations and he needs to fix it. Maybe not. Maybe it's something that I'm missing.
I like your approach. You're kind of saying go all the way back to the best thinkers we have, all the way back to Socrates. And you're saying, and I don't know if you agree with this, but in my conception, Socrates is like the birth of the scientific approach. It is the scientific approach. It just evolved after that. One way the Socratic method has been described is a negative process of hypothesis elimination, of hypothesis generation and elimination.
Heavy.
We generate hypotheses and we eliminate them. And it's the questions that will help moving that forward.
Yeah.
I want to explain to the audience, because we're both in agreement on this, I want to spend some time hitting the Socrates thing a little bit more. So Socrates is 2,500 years ago. This was after 600 years of ancient Greece advancing. He wasn't like the start of anything. He's more like the end of it. It was only 3 more generations before Alexander the Great learned from Aristotle, who learned from Plato, who learned from Socrates. Alexander the Great spread these ideas through an empire, and then within his lifetime, once he died, it was all over. And so that was like the end. Socrates is almost the end of this 600-year period of advancement. And for people who know Socrates and his teaching method, this thing that we just described, it's important to explain to people what the teaching method was, the standard one, before Socrates, or I'm pretty sure it's not just Socrates, more like he's the crown. I don't know, go back 600 years in ancient Greece, and the standard teaching method was this. I'm the teacher, you're the student, you learn what I say, you parrot what I say, verbatim, and the way I judge you, the way you are judged is how closely you parrot me, which leaves no room for you improving on me. And the Socratic teaching is, I could be wrong, you could know something better than me, and even if you don't know it now, you could invent it in the moment. And we say that now in parenting. I'm pretty sure a lot of parents recognize, hey, my kids should be better than me. They should be smarter than me. Don't they say that or no?
I wouldn't know, but when the children are very curious, so they ask a lot of questions, they ask a lot of whys.
Yes.
And parents are not always ready to give them answers. And I don't think based on what I just said in this session, I don't think they should. Because parents shouldn't give answers to parrot. Parents should give questions for the children to think about.
So
maybe it's a good approach as well.
I have an example. My daughters are teenagers now, but let's say 8 years ago or something, my younger daughter came to me and asked, so are aliens real? And I thought, man, the way I'm going to answer is really going to affect what she thinks next. So I said, that's big and complicated. I'm not sure what you want to hear from me. And then she pressed me harder and was like, come on, just give me an answer. I was like, all right, aliens are real. And then she ended the conversation with me right away, turned around, went to her friend and said, yep, I knew it. Aliens are real. And it's like, no, that's not how it works. You can't do that. Because now if somebody asks you, why do you believe what you believe? All you can say is, well, my daddy said that doesn't work. What's your reasons? Yeah. You're going to have to hear my reasons. And it's going to be longer than a one sentence.
Well, that is where, I don't know, I may be wrong. I don't have children yet. So I may be wrong. But that is where you have an opportunity to teach your child to ask questions and to think about things.
Well, I
by
did.
not giving them answers and expecting them to ask you questions about your answers, but instead of answers, giving them questions.
Yes. So, but let me tell you what I did with her. I gave her what she wanted, knowing that it's a mistake, and then helping her reveal the mistake afterwards. Because right after that happened, that whole thing I just explained, I said with her that day, she never did it again. She never came to me and said, do you believe this? and I don't want to hear your reasons. That never happened again. Now, maybe it happened subconsciously or maybe without me noticing, but there was a big learning event for her there. Because I got to say, look, if somebody asks you, why do you believe in aliens? What are you going to say? And it got her thinking. And I said, you can't say, my daddy said so. You have to have your own reasons. You have to believe in those reasons yourself, your own reasoning for it. So I think it's fine to answer somebody's question because it's going to lead to something else anyway. And a really maybe more serious topic where this matters is, if your child comes to you and says, is there a God? Or is Islam real or something? If I'm an ex-Muslim, by the way, so my actual answer is no. I think it's unfair if I don't answer that question. I should answer it and then give my reasoning. And of course, if they don't want to hear my reasoning, that's a separate problem that should be, hurdled on its own. Why don't you want to hear the reasoning?
I'm definitely no authority on parenting, but what I do realize from my nephews and things is that other than home, they also have other social circles where they're pressured to come up with some identity for themselves and for their belonging to various groups in those circles. And it's a difficult thing to do. And that's why they need these answers in order to know which group they need to belong to. So I don't know what the answer is. I think when I'll have kids, I'll try to make them belong to the group that asks questions of everything.
Yes, the scientists.
The scientists, yes.
The scientists. I think that label's okay, scientists. And if I'm gonna have another label, how about humans? That's good enough. Or people. We don't really need more than that. Yeah, so one thing we were talking about, the way you found me was this one of these videos you watched was between me and Eli Schragenheim, where I asked him to try to apply his knowledge and TOC knowledge more generally on the world as an organization. Try to see the world as an organization, and can we use this body of knowledge to improve what we're already doing? And of course, what came out is obviously we're already doing some of this. That's what the UN is, or an attempt at it. You pointed out some basic stuff that the UN does use military to
Peace Corps,
try to keep the peace. At least they say so. I don't know any details. So what do you think about that? You think there's any existing TOC knowledge that could help? Like if a whole bunch of world leaders learn TOC, what would happen?
It's a difficult question because so far TOC has proven that it can, this makes me think of another Eli's quote, is that when you improve everything, you improve nothing. Yeah. And that's why TOC works well when everybody is doing the nonsense thing and one company out of all of the companies is doing better than nonsense, is maybe doing theory of constraints. For example, Amazon, right? It's a well-known fact that Jeff Bezos has mandated all of his managers to read The Goal as one of the 3 or 4 books that they must read. Yeah, so when everybody else is doing something and one company is doing better, and the reason is maybe TOC, then it's very easy to see how that is a good thing. But when everybody is starting to do the new normal, then you still, again, I come back to Goldratt, and he has this viable vision subject topic where he had I believe a green line and a red line curve, the green curve and the red curve, where one curve is you improve, and then you keep stable at the level of improvement that you arrive to. And on another, you have a constant improvement, like a logarithmic curve upward, where you're constantly finding new things to improve. And I don't think that theory of constraints, with all of its various tools, is the end, right? If everybody in the world would, all the companies and all the people and all the schools and all the parents, if everybody would use theory of constraints, that is not somewhere where we need to stop. Because even there, you would have some pockets where they're doing something better, and you would see them, they would be distinguished, and other pockets which are succumbing to inertia. And basically, the thing about theory of constraints is that you have to consciously put effort into upkeeping the velocity, right? If you don't do it, inertia is going to kill your velocity, and you're going down. And I think in one of the podcasts with Eli Schragenheim, you talked about Boeing, for example, if I'm not mistaken. So Boeing, they had a culture of engineering, and then they had another company which was basically just a rotten company, which Boeing bought, or it's not really sensible who bought who, right? Yeah. So that other company came in, and those rotten managers caused Boeing to become what Boeing is today, which is a rotten company. So even if you cause everybody to be at the level of TOC as we can describe between us right now, even then you would have some pockets of distinguishment and some pockets where they don't have the velocity, the effort required, the constant effort required in continuously upkeeping the standards, the improvements. And I'm not even talking about the exponential curve. I'm just talking about upkeeping the stability of a good company, a good society, a good. So I don't know if can we even look at the world as a system of interconnected parts? Yes, but we need to choose in our terminology what are parts. Like, is a country a part? Is a government a part? Right? What is part and what is not part? If you read the book Snow Crash, an excellent book, by the way, by Neil Stephenson, he talks about a world where, and by the way, that book is the book that brought the word metaverse to our vocabulary. He talks about a world of desperate societies where each small society is managed by a different company. Or you have one conglomerate company that is managing many different societies, but they're distributed around the world. So you can have like the McDonald's village, and you can have tens of thousands of these all around the world. And you don't have governments anymore. There's like no local authorities, no nothing. Every village is managed by their own private security, the McDonald's security, for example, and etc., etc. I believe in the book he has a pizza company that is managing these things. And they have their own laws, their own everything. So it's a different way of looking at the world. And are we at a level where we can stop thinking about the world in the way that we are thinking of it right now? Governments, borders, ethnicities, nationalities. Are we willing to?
I'm not saying get rid of any of that. I mean, just imagine.
No. Well, exactly. That's my point. Are we ready to rethink how it should look like? Because you're not saying we should get rid of any of that, and maybe we should. I don't know. Right?
I think in the very far future we can.
I don't know. Maybe we can.
I mean, let me go back to something you said a little bit a few seconds ago, to stick to something general first. You said TOC is not the end. So I'm going to explain for the audience. TOC is not the end. Our current laws of physics is not the end. The scientific approach, the methods, is also not the end. We keep improving them. I don't know if that addresses any part of what you said there. But so in one sense, we know it's not the end in this sense. So TOC mostly, it focuses on organizations, business, nonprofits, government departments like a school. These are all things it has touched. No one, as far as I know, attempted to apply this knowledge to political issues. And so that's already a whole. It's not the end in that sense. We can get closer to the end without ever reaching it. And that's what all science is. That's all implied from this basic concept that we're not perfect. We're never going to reach a perfect or an ideal state. I don't know if that changes any of what you were saying, because what I had asked you was, if more people learned TOC, or more generally the scientific approach, and I mean the relevant people like leaders, like actually you sort of gave an example of, a company where you said, okay, the head of this company has a big influence from TOC, and he requires all of his managers to learn TOC. Suppose a country did that. So suppose the UN said, hey, we recommend everyone learn TOC.
So, by the way, Goldratt has several videos where he explains how he affected the Japanese Ministry of Infrastructure, I believe, which is the ministry that is responsible for rebuilding after earthquakes and things like that. And because in Japan they have very frequent natural disasters, and they need to build projects very fast, especially, like dams and etc. And they also need to upkeep and maintain some of these things. I don't remember exactly in which presentation, but Goldratt was explaining that there was some village with a dam on top of that village, and that dam every year it had to be added construction had to be done, and it had to be a project that is done on time, because if you don't do it on time, then the rain will come and the whole village is going to be wiped away. And I believe he said he helped them come up with some ways of managing these projects that was better, much better than what they were using before, and they mandated that whole government agency to start using the critical chain method and other theory of constraints methods to manage several of their government agencies. I don't know, again, back to what I said before, I don't know if they still do it, because as I said, you need to have that constant effort to upkeep the high standard, and improve upon it. And another item I want to touch on is Goldratt has his book, The Choice, where he presents his philosophy. And one of his pillars of TOC, you could say, in that philosophy is that every situation can be improved. So that is why when I'm saying, TOC is not the end, or nothing is the end, because everything can be improved and should be probably improved. In some cases, depends, is that the bottleneck or not?
Right.
If it is, you should be improving it. You should be thinking of ways to improve. And that is part of the core philosophy of theory of constraints. And I really like that philosophy. I tried adopting it to myself, like for example, inherent simplicity, that everything is simple if you dig down deep enough. Or, and like another pillar is that there's always a win-win-win solution for every conflict. Every conflict can be resolved. So these concepts, these philosophy ideas, it's not enough that you just read them. You need to understand what they mean. You need to kind of internalize that I am at a certain level, but I believe, I have this very, very strong belief that wherever it is that I am, it can always be better. It can always be improved. Or I'm in this very, very deep mess, but I have this strong, strong belief in me that eventually all of this, there's something very simple underneath all of this big bowl of spaghetti, right? Or I'm in argument with this customer or this other vendor or whatever, or this other person, and I really have this conflict with them. But I have this very, very strong belief that we can find a solution that is going to be good for both of us, or the three of us, or whoever. So these beliefs, these internal beliefs, I don't know how to make people believe them, because as I said them out loud, you realize that most of the world is exactly the opposite. When they're in a conflict, they're sure that there's no way other than mutual destruction. Loss solutions are the way. And how do you take all of these people involved and you make them believe that, yes, you can come to not a compromise, but an actual win-win solution to all sides? How do you cause that change to happen in the world? I don't know.
I said I do, but I realized you switched it on me too. Initially you said, how does someone learn these things? I know the answer to that.
Yeah.
How do I get 100,000 people to do it? I don't know that.
Exactly.
But I'll tell you some things that are in the way, some obstacles. So just as an example, all these great thinkers that we've been talking about, many of which are famous from the Enlightenment era, they themselves claim what their education was. It was the classical education. The classical education is the education that people in the West, at least the people rich enough to hire the right tutors, were giving to their kids, all the way back to ancient Greece. And the classical education, the main thing in it is philosophy. It's basically saying, learn how to think first, then you can focus on physics, chemistry, biology, or whatever the fuck.
Yep.
And 150 years ago in America, when the American compulsory education system started, they erased that most important part of the education, philosophy. It doesn't exist anywhere in the American education anymore.
If I'm not mistaken, and again, I'm not an expert in history, but the British Empire, I believe, was, and probably even prior empires as well, but the British Empire had a logistical challenge to control basically the whole world, which they conquered. And the way that they control it is by having people who do the logistics. And those people had to be know how to read and write, know a bit of math, things like that, while most of the population of the world at that time didn't necessarily knew those things. So I believe somewhere that I read is that they created this system of schools, which basically takes children and drills into them some skills which they may or may not need. And
well,
it is not in order to improve them or something, but it is more in order to sustain this whole bureaucratic, huge worldwide machine.
Well, let me be specific for people, at least in the American case. The designers of the American education system, which were psychologists who were trying to engineer people, that's their words, by the way, social engineering. They said what their goals were, what the product of the students was supposed to be. And you say skills. One of the skills was they need to develop a habit of responding to authority. Obedience.
Yeah, of course.
That's what they were doing.
Well, all governments need obedient citizens.
Sorry?
all governments need obedient citizens, otherwise they wouldn't have power.
I think if we had a government or we had a nation of a bunch of Einsteins, I think the government would be fine. I think if the government would be fine. I don't think Einstein's hurting anyone or a bunch of Einsteins. No. I think what's not fine is a type of government that expects obedience and wants obedience and does things, like, I don't know how many governments do this. Maybe it's every single one, where there's people in the government who's like, okay, I'm going to do things in secret. And I know the people wouldn't want it. That's part of why I have to do it in secret. That's happening all the time. Yeah, in that kind of government, a bunch of Einsteins as citizens would be bad for that government. But that's a bad government. If we're talking about a good government, a populace of just Einsteins would be great.
There's no such thing as a good government.
Oh, shit. Okay. So, okay. That's fine. I mean, a government is just a bunch of people. Okay, so it's a bunch of individuals who themselves have good and bad ideas.
Yes, but in the modern sense of the word, a government is the body that has a monopoly on violence.
On the initiation of violence.
And that is how they control. And that is how they control the populace from succumbing into chaos or anarchy. Well, anarchy in the negative meaning of the word, because anarchy doesn't. Yeah, anarchy doesn't really have a negative meaning, but it was
people
given the governments, they made a villain out of the word anarchy to make it.
Yes, it did.
So anyway, and some of the, for example, Austrian economists and the derivatives out of them, for example, Chicago economists like Milton Friedman, they are talking about.
Mises.
Sorry?
So like Mises, Ludwig von Mises. I'm guessing.
Yes. Mises and many other people who believe in free markets are. It's not just free markets; it's also freedom. And also, when the United States was created, like 300 years ago, something like that, the idea of being free from the King of England was a main core idea. And that included personal freedoms for people, no taxes, and all kinds of other things that the government didn't have any authority to claim or to charge. The government didn't have an authority to take taxes from people, right? And people could do any enterprise they wished or wanted to do. And it brought enormous prosperity to the United States back when it was created. And that's why the whole world wanted to go there, because there they could have a chance to prosper as human beings, to fully reach some of their full potential, right? While in most of the other world, even though it happened in France as well in the revolution, where this idea of freedom was starting to come to the front and center. Before that, there was no such idea. People didn't believe they were free. People had their ruler, their leader, and whatever that the ruler or leader said, that is what they had to do. That they had no freedom of choice of their own. If the ruler said taxes, you have to pay taxes. If you don't pay your taxes, you get they get violent on you. So that idea of freedom came from the Enlightenment. That idea of economic freedom as well came from the Enlightenment. And today we have many governments around the world which have completely forgotten what enlightenment was. They completely forgotten these ideas of why people need to be free. They call it using words like democracy is freedom for the people, blah, blah, blah. But actually, when you look at what actually is happening, it's not even the democracy like they describe it, right? So
Most democracies are really just a tyranny of the majority.
In most cases, the minority, yes.
Oh,
so
okay.
The oligarchy, yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So that concept of freedom has been lost. The enlightened idea of freedom has been lost. And in the pockets where it has been tried, for example, if you look at what's the name of Friedman's Milton? Let me look it up real quick. Also in the 80s, Milton Friedman did a series of like a TV series called Free to Choose.
Okay.
And he explains how different government policies are being implemented at different times in different places. And he visited various places. One of the episodes talks about Hong Kong, how Hong Kong didn't really have a lot of land, they didn't have a lot of natural resources. All they had was a port. So they had a very, very small government, which didn't really have like taxes or many other restrictions on the populace of what the populace should be doing. And if somebody failed, they failed. Like there was no bailouts or anything like that. And it created a very, very prosperous and very, very I don't know, like many good words that you could describe a good economy in Hong Kong at that time. And of course, later it was all replaced, it was all forgotten, and right now it's basically part
when China
China.
took over?
Yeah. But not only when China took over, also
ruling it. Go ahead.
Yeah, also when they got too prosperous, they started like too much prosperity also creates some corruption. So these things they require effort to upkeep. Like I said before with the TOC thought process that we did about the world. Some ideas like freedom, for example. Freedom is not free. You have to fight for it. I'm sure I'm quoting someone, I don't remember who. It requires a constant effort and a constant upkeep to keep that freedom that you have. And once you let go, you're going to lose it. You don't think you're going to lose it at first, but eventually you're going to lose it. And it so happens that after all the revolutions and all the wars, when people finally woke up and said, well, now we are finally defended our freedom and now we're free, it deteriorates over time, over many years, over decades. It deteriorates, and unfortunately, the world, the human consciousness of everybody, the 9 billion people we have, they need a refresher of what it means to be free and what it means to be in the state that where people are not free. And that refresher, unfortunately, is quite often very violent. I don't think it can be any other way. I don't think that, patting on their heads is going to tell the people, you know what,
so
everything's going to be okay.
A couple of things I want to say about that. So I remember hearing from someone in the TOC world lamenting on the idea that, we're losing our TOC practitioners. They're dying. And
they're very old.
10 years, he said, maybe within 10 years, there won't be anybody left continuing and advancing the field. That's him saying it's dying, and we have to upkeep it. And I think one reason that, and you said the same thing about freedom, the concept of freedom. One reason that's happening is we have really old ideas that are ingrained in our society that are very strong. And we also have very old ideas that are ingrained in our society, which are very good and strong, like the scientific approach, TOC, freedom, stuff like that, the Enlightenment values. Yep. But the bad stuff is bigger and older and more widespread. Yep. And the good stuff, not a lot of people. I mean, like just a tiny little example. I used to imagine the Enlightenment is kind of happening to everybody. I think maybe it's just the top 1% of people. We're maybe less than that even. But that was big enough for us to call it the Enlightenment era. 1% of the people were getting it. Yeah, there's a big chunk of the world that it hasn't hit yet. And in the parts of the world where it did, it may be going away a little bit with these things like, making a school system that erased it. Yeah, so I think what we need to do is what you said, bring back the old good knowledge like Socrates. And be in schools. It has to be in parents teaching their kids this stuff.
Well, Eli Goldratt tried to do that with TOC for education. I believe it still goes strong, but it's not something that you would see on the news or anything, right? It's like somewhere there on the margin, some school teacher is doing some TOC of education material, and it's a very good thing. It's a very positive thing, but I don't believe it has the big enough effect that, like what you are talking about, like every school in the world.
I mean, from what I understand, it can't be the schools actually making this change. It has to be parents.
Probably, yeah.
And that means people like you and me speaking to all the parents. That's a ginormous task. I want to mention somebody. I was exposed to a parenting philosophy 14 years ago right after I left Islam. It's called Taking Children Seriously. Founded by Sarah Fitz-Claridge. Also David Deutsch, who wrote the book The Beginning of Infinity. He's a physicist and epistemologist. And anyway, together they made this parenting philosophy. And its basic tenets are things like children are full human beings, which goes against 99% of people and what they think of as children, what children are, or how to treat them.
Yeah.
And one major thing it has to fix, and it fixes, is this basic idea that, parenting primarily, after the basic stuff like feed your kid and give shelter, is education, which means you have to understand what education is, which means you have to understand how the mind works, how learning works, the scientific approach. Okay, that's in there. That has to be in there.
We just mentioned that most parents have not learned any of this in their schools.
Right. So Sarah Fitz-Claridge is trying to expose this. She's on Twitter. She has a website. Maybe there's like 1,000 people or 2,000 people that know about this and are like following it in their lives. Maybe in 500 years, it'll be 10 million people. And then keep going. I want to change subjects real quick. It's about anarchy. There's a movie called K-Pax. K-P-A-X. And it describes an alien came to Earth in the form of a human. He looked like a human. And he's from this planet K-Pax. And he was put in a mental hospital right away because he was not lying. He said, like, first thing that happened was there was some car accident. Police came to him and they asked him who he is. And he said it. He wasn't lying. And right away, they put him in the mental hospital. And now he's speaking to a psychologist or psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist is learning about K-Pax. And one of the things in K-Pax is there's no government. And there's no laws. And the psychiatrist asked, well, how do you deal with, like, whatever, people doing bad things? Or he said, we don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what they're describing in this movie is a future that is so advanced that we don't need governments anymore. Like, there's no serial killers, so you don't need police. He was describing there's no police. There's no, judges. We're all judges. Really, that's how it should be. But so I don't know. I'm not really sure why we had to go through this period in human civilization where we had governments. And I'm not really sure if that imagined future is possible. What do you think?
These science fiction ideas, and I can also include, for example, Star Trek in there, are kind of showing you what enlightenment could have looked like if we took it as the main philosophy of all humankind. And all of these things, they already were happening in the minds of people during the Enlightenment. As you said, not enough people, not all the people, because there were too many old ideas still lingering around these few people who had these enlightened philosophies. But, for example, in Star Trek, after, if you know a little bit of the lore, there were some wars, there were some hard years for humanity, and eventually they arrived to a state where all humanity and all the other alien races are in a federation where basically there is no crime in that federation. There is no need for anything because you get everything you need. Like, you don't need for food or shelter or whatever. You just have it. And I think that is the epitome of the idea of enlightenment. But this also reminds me of how existing governments, which are corrupting these ideas and are coming up with some completely insane things like UBI, for example, or CBDC. If you don't know what this is Universal Basic Income, UBI. What is that? It means that everybody is going to get free money because they need to eat and they need shelter. So everybody is going to get their basic needs met using the currency. Well, if they get that, then nobody is going to work. Like, what motivation do people have to invest into productivity if they are getting fed? And it's basically like in the Matrix, you're a battery. If you're getting shelter and you're getting fed, you don't need to be productive other than your own body, because of evolution, is generating heat, right? That's it. You're a battery. So this is a completely insane idea, because today, if people want to be prosperous, and Eli Goldratt said this many, many times, people don't want their lives to be easy. They want their lives to be meaningful. And it's not just him saying that. Many other very smart people have said this, that people are striving to find meaning in life. They don't want to be spoon-fed with currency units so that they could buy some gruel to eat every day and some basic shelter to live in, right? They want to find meaning. That's what makes us human. That's what makes us inspired and builds our aspirations for improvement, like we just discussed. When you want people to always seek improvement, you need to inspire them to aspire to that improvement by being motivated because they have meaning in what they're doing. At the moment, right now, most people, they find meaning, for example, in their work, in their families, in their communities, volunteering, things like that. So people do need to do things in order to find these meanings in life. But whenever you start, and I'm just connecting all the dots now, and as Milton Friedman said it in his episode about Social Security, whenever you're paying people to not work, they're going to be miserable, they're going to be depressed, because on one hand, they're in a conflict. On one hand, they cannot go and start doing meaningful things because it's going to cut off their Social Security checks.
Well, UBI doesn't have to cut off that. You didn't mention that part, but anyway.
I have no idea, because the current governments, the way they propose those ideas, they propose them in a very corrupt way. So I'm not sure that whenever governments propose UBI the way they propose them at the moment, it's not yet a reality, thank God. I'm not sure that they are considering that people need to have meaning in their lives. It's a basic need, and without meaning, this society crumbles, right? So that I don't remember what your question was, but I went on a tangent here.
Well, what I had brought up was the imagined future of anarchy with no governments.
Yeah.
And I mentioned K-Pax, and then you mentioned Star Trek, which I agree is talking about the same kind of thing.
So this enlightenment and the as a technologist, I've been using computers since I was like 13 or something, and I believe I'm a technologist. It is impossible to say that technology has not been improving over time in such a way that the human productivity has been exponentially growing, and it's still. I still stand by what I just said, is that humans, they still need meaning. So even when you have AI and robots and basically food becomes plentiful and free for everybody in the whole world, and shelter becomes plentiful and free for everybody in the whole world, humans will still try to find meaning, because if they don't, they just go depressed and they off themselves. It's a basic need that we have, right? So what I'm saying is that many people are saying, well, technology is improving our lives so much that soon we will not need to work. Well, you don't need to work now. You can just go on Social Security and basically be in the UBI world. But most people that try to do that, they're very miserable and very depressed, and they have other...
people complain about even like going into retirement and then not enjoying their lives because while they were working, they never learned how to live, let's say, having hobbies or something. A hobby is a type of work. Like for example, I think my dad would love a retirement where he's farming, because that's kind of where he came from, a farming background. He would love getting his hand into the dirt and farming, and I mean on his own piece of land. It's not a job where he's getting paid a salary. That's work, and it's also a hobby, and it's a game. It's fun for him. I see it as fun too. And then all with the cooking too. Like I cook now because I didn't have a wife to do my cooking, I guess. And my kids learned my wife's cooking and my mom's cooking, and then we were alone on our own, and they were like, where's all the cooking? So I had to learn it all. And then it became fun. Initially, it wasn't fun, and it became fun. I could see myself, when I'm old, that'd be a big part of my life. Is it meaningful? I mean, I don't know. Meaning is the right word. I'm having fun. Is that the same thing?
Meaningful is when, if you think about in terms of TOC, again, back to TOC, you have some goal in life, right? To have some prosperity, some a feeling, a good feeling, not just fun, but a basic feeling that is good and not depressed or stressed or all the bad feelings. Even though these feelings are not to be avoided, you have to have the contrast sometimes. But some people are succumbing to constantly be in stress or constantly be in depression or various other not good feelings. I don't even know how to describe them under one umbrella.
I think our audience knows what you're saying too.
Yeah. So anyway, so you need to have a goal, and you need to try to reach that goal, and you need to set new goals each time. Like, so you need to think about how to improve your life, how to get into somewhere better. And it doesn't have to be something that requires more effort. Maybe it's something that requires less effort. For example, one of the things that I constantly tell myself is that I want peace and quiet. Because as a young adult, I work at a company, and I have my wife, and I have my relatives, and I have the world around me, and it's a constant source of distraction and distractions and stress and things like that. And I have a goal where I want to, as much as possible, not be affected by that. To kind of meditate, to become a kind of a Hindu yogi or something like that, where the world doesn't affect them as much. So it requires effort. It requires some effort. It requires some explaining sometimes to my environment that this is what I'm striving for. This is my goal. My goal is to have more peace and more quiet, less stress. So some people who might hear me say, well, you should have a goal and you should strive to that goal and you should continuously improve, they're thinking, oh, that's too much work. I'm saying, no, yes, it's work, but it's less work, not more work.
So here's how some other people say it. And I know Eli Goldratt said this in some form. Instead of looking for what I should do, I should focus on or figure out what I shouldn't do. And
both.
And rule things out, as opposed to here's my to-do list today, it's 1,000 things. It should be more like, here's a menu of things, let's see what 90% of things I'm going to cut out and only do the most important things that are going to actually bring an impact.
Yeah, that's when
trying to find the constraint kind of concept.
That's when Eli Goldratt was defining the word focus. Well, and I think defining terminology is very important. Words have meaning, and it's very important to make sure that the other person that you're talking to understands the same meaning that you mean. So when Eli defines the word focus, he says most people, when they hear the word focus, they think I should select which things I should work on or concentrate on. But in his definition, it is not less important. So it is like equally important to also choose intentionally choose which things not to work on, which things not to concentrate on. Because if you concentrate on everything, you don't concentrate on anything.
Right.
So if you focus on everything, you don't focus on anything. So, and again, that's something he used to say and write. So that's why this word focus has both of these meanings in it. And once you do both of the things, then you can really focus. And if you only did one of the things, you will find it's very difficult to say that you're focused, because you've chosen which things you want to do, but you have all these other things that you have not made a decision on, and that decision is lingering in your brain all the time, and you're procrastinating and you're postponing work and all the other stuff like student syndrome, Parkinson's law, all the other terms from the critical chain project management terminology vocabulary. And that is because you are not focused, because you did only half of the focusing thing.
Well, part of the issue is people are on autopilot. And so as an example, somebody might ask me a question, and if I'm on autopilot, I'm just automatically answering. Where instead of autopilot, if I think for a moment, what should I do now in response to this person asking me this question? Maybe the answer is answer him. Maybe the answer is, hey, I don't have time right now, ask me later. Maybe the answer is shoot him. I remember giving this example to my daughter. She freaked out. She goes, what do you mean shoot him? Well, suppose it was a murderer trying to kill me and he asked me a question. So yeah, we got to get out of autopilot and make a conscious decision about how we're going to spend our time. Every step of action, even every emotion, every thought.
Yeah. And sometimes our brains are wired in a way that it doesn't really work the way we want. So we want to be logical. We want to think before we answer. But our brains sometimes are built in such a way that they are reactive. And if you read anything about neurolinguistic programming, for example, that the whole subject, which says how to program humans, basically using words, and they really give a lot of examples about hypnosis and about breaking of frames. So right now, me and you, we are in the frame. We're making a podcast. If I do something completely crazy right now, it's going to break the frame and it's going to cause you to
come out of autopilot.
To be overwhelmed, to go into a state where I can start feeding you your subconscious ideas. And this is a method that many gypsies are using when they're coming to steal from you, for example. They would come at you, they would break your frame. You're thinking somebody came at me and she's asking for what time it is or something like that. But then they start talking about, some prophecies or whatever. And you're completely overwhelmed by that. And your brain starts thinking, what is happening? And it takes him a long time to think what is happening. And because our brains are wired like that, during that time, you're very vulnerable for manipulation. So, yes, being logical and thinking about answers before we answer and etc., these are all extremely great goals to strive for, but we have our physical constraints, our human brains, our human physiology that is not allowing us. For example, if you don't have hands, you can't shoot anyone, right?
We can't be perfect, but we can improve on the current state. So whatever level I am today in ability to get out of autopilot, I can be better tomorrow and then better the next day and so on. So yeah, I'm never going to reach a state where I got out of autopilot in the exact moment I wanted, in every single moment I needed to. That's never going to happen.
And at the beginning of our conversations, we talked about flexibility and open-mindedness. This is also a skill that you can improve upon. You can be more open-minded, be more flexible in not accepting an answer as a definitive answer, and believing that every answer can be changed and can be improved. So all of these things are possible, but many people, they don't strive to improve upon these things. You have to be consciously aware that you have these items which you can improve, and then you need to consciously decide that you want to improve them, and then you need to do the focus, which means decide on what it is that you want to do and what it is that you don't want to do.
So let's go a little bit older than that. This you're describing somebody who's already been raised, and this is how he needs to be. So the only way that's going to happen, in my understanding, is you were raised by parents that tried to and succeeded to instill a value in education, for example, and having some rudimentary understanding of what education is, that it's not hitting you on the head saying, listen to me, kind of thing,
Well, my parents, maybe your parents as well, in their idea of education was harassing me to go to a university.
Educate that dumb brain.
And when you go to the university, in many universities around the world today, as we know, you get brainwashed, not educated. So education is a nice word, but as I already mentioned, you have to be very specific. When you say words, you have to make sure that the other side that hears the word means the same thing that you mean.
It has to happen in your actions. Yeah, it can't be just the words. So, having a bad conception of what education is versus having a good one, part of how you got that in the first place is from your own parents, who got it from their parents, and so on. This brings up for me I've been so like, how do I say this? I have a list of who I think are my top thinkers to ever live in human history. I didn't know this till I looked it up afterwards. I looked up the ethnic background of every one of these people, and all but two of them, maybe three, had a European Jewish background. And then I started to ask Jewish people, hey, what's up with this? Why? Like, one of the questions I've been asking is, like, did the Jews go, and I mean far back, like 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, did they have a big influence from ancient Greece? And if not, then maybe it was afterwards. I don't know. And then another basic part of it is like, what is special about the Jewish culture that resulted in this? And it's not just Jewish, because it's the Jews who went to Europe. That, just to name of the few of the people that I'm talking, Richard Feynman, Einstein. Well, I don't know, where does Eli Goldratt fit in this? He was born and raised in Israel.
Yes.
But Israel, in this era, was already influenced by the Enlightenment.
And I believe Eli Goldratt said that his father was a rabbi or something similar, or a very religious person. But
that's interesting. Okay.
The thing is that Jews, I don't, as a Jew myself in Israel, which came here from Europe, I don't think it's about enlightenment. I don't think it's about Greece. I think it's even before that, throughout many generations. As you say, education. For Jews, education was studying the book. So what does studying the book means? Well, many years ago, like thousands of years ago, the book became written. But before that, it was verbal. And when Jews start studying the book, they start at a very young age, basically as children. And a big part of the book, the Torah, is the explanations of what was meant in the book. Now, why is that? Now, today, you can go to a church or something like that, and every priest, that's going to be their presentation to their community of when this and that chapter, this and that phrase, what they actually meant was this and that, and then he adds his own meaning to it, right? But in Judaism, this was happening throughout thousands of years because it was always a question and answer kind of a dialogue interaction. So a child would ask why, or a grown-up would tell the child something, and they would expect them to ask questions about it, like we discussed before. And then the grown-up is expected to have the answers. Now, if he doesn't have the answers, he's going to the rabbi. The rabbi will give him the answers from some other book, and if the rabbi doesn't have the answer, he needs to create the answer based on logic. And I believe this predates the Greeks.
Interesting.
Because the Jewish people, they existed before Greece, they existed before Rome, of course, and all of these different empires. They were exiled back and from. Eventually, some of them got into Europe, but there was also a very big exile into Babylon, which is mostly in where Iran is today. And there are many very smart Jews that are from that background as well. So not just European backgrounds, but also from the Parsi backgrounds. And because Jews were mostly living in this area of the Middle East, but they were exiled back and from to various places, the culture remained, because that was the cohesiveness that kept their society together. The book, the reading of the book, and not just parroting it, but also understanding it, asking the questions and getting the answers. And that cohesiveness of society that is funneled into that one object, that one education, right? And now you know what I mean when I say education. So I believe that is what gives that upbringing that you have found brought out many very smart people. And also in the same lecture that I heard recently again from Goldratt about the word focus, when he was tasked with defining the theory of constraints with one sentence, and he found one word. He's also telling the story about Judaism. So yes. I don't remember the names of the rabbis that he mentions, but he says that some people, they came to one rabbi and asked him to define what is Judaism, and he kicked them out. And then they went to another rabbi, and he says, Judaism is do unto others as you want to be done to you, and vice versa, that don't do unto others what you don't want to be done to you. And then he says that for 200 years in Judaism, they were arguing if this is true or not, if all Judaism can be derived from that one expression. Now, here again, you can see what I just said, is that in Judaism, you don't just accept answers as is. You have a lot of debate. You have a lot of questioning. I mean, maybe in modern small enclaves of Judaism, you don't have that anymore as much. But throughout history, that is part of the culture. The culture is this true? Is this something that is valuable for us? For example, the laws of kashrut, the kosher, not kosher. Why were they made, right? What is their origin? They had value. What value did they have? They protected people from getting sick. Because back in the day, when you didn't have hygiene at the same level we have today, when
part of the freezers and everything else we have,
and running water, when some part of the population were eating pigs, they were getting sick, and the Jews decided that maybe if we don't eat pigs, we will not get sick. They tried it out. It happened that yes, it doesn't work, and they wrote a law, basically, and they turned that law into part of the religious ceremony. That because I believe that Jews basically believe that once you turn something into part of the religious ceremony, then it can live a very long life and protect the population over many generations. They were right. Eventually, all those things, they stopped being true anymore. And as we discussed at the beginning of our conversation, the answers have changed. The question is the same, how we can protect our health, but the answers have changed. But because it has been living with the Jewish society for so many generations, there's so much inertia that many of these rules and laws, they cannot be changed anymore because of inertia, right?
Well, at least so far they haven't been able to, but if you can imagine a million years from now, they might be different a million years from now.
Yeah, there are some reformist Jews, for example, who are changing some of the rules. But hopefully this answers your question.
The other thing that I understand is, as far as I can see from the way I see Jews talking, mainly Jews are atheists. They're Jewish culture now. They don't have the religion anymore. And they still are connected to the whole culture and maybe even the religion in a sense, like they're still willing to go to temple and stuff like that, right?
Yeah. Yes. So many, well, at least in Israel, but not just in Israel, I believe it's all around the world. After the exile in Europe and after the second... What, sorry?
You mean 1948 or right before that, maybe?
No. I mean the exile. I mean when they were exiled from the Middle East to Europe, back in the
Okay.
Spanish exile and the Babylonian exile. And so one of the risks of a people that is in exile, which has been banished from their land, from their home, is that they will start acquiring the culture of where they are now, right?
And they're worried
So
about the
they're
bad culture.
yeah, so they will lose their Jewishness, basically. So that is again what I just described. Jews, they kept this book as an anchor that kept their Judaism in such a way that it was not lost when they were exiled in all around the world. So, but what did happen is that in many places, because of anti-Semitism in Europe that was rising in 1800s as well, Jews had to protect themselves by not showing that they are Jews. And that led to many people. I, for example, I come from the Soviet Union, and in Soviet Union, there was a huge number of Jews that got assimilated into the Russian Empire at the time when Russia conquered Poland. So that huge number of Jews, if they wanted to participate in the Soviet society or even in the Russian society, pre-Soviet Union,
To act like atheists.
they could abolish their religion, and they could then travel and exit their cities. And if they wanted to stay religious, they couldn't leave their cities. So there were all kinds of restrictions, all kinds of constraints on Jews that didn't allow them to be openly Jewish throughout history. And that's where you have these underground Jews, which later, after a generation or two or three or four, they became these kind of semi-atheists that are still keeping some of the customs, right? Like you said, they're not actually atheists. Maybe they believe in God, maybe they don't believe in God, but they do believe that they need to keep the customs throughout history in order for society to remain cohesive. So otherwise, they're going to lose themselves, and basically Judaism is going to disappear.
Yeah. So as an example, Eli Goldratt wears, and this is just a joke, he wears, what's this called? The little hat?
The kippah or yarmulke.
Yeah. And I don't even know if he's if
Yes,
he
he
believes
is.
in God or not. What, did he?
Well, yeah, I think so.
You think so? Okay.
Yeah.
Because I heard that just because you wear this doesn't mean that you're Jewish in the religion Jew. It could be, I heard some people wear it just like you said, to keep with the customs.
Yeah, well, for example, I don't wear it usually, but when I go visit the graveyard or I go visit the synagogue for some event, like somebody has a bar mitzvah or something, then of course I respect the place and the tradition, and I wear the yarmulke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, so we're over 2 hours now, and I'm getting tired. This was really fun. I hope we do this again. I'm sure, at least for me, I'll come up with ideas of what we could talk about again, and I'll post this in a few weeks, I think, after I edit it. And but yeah, it was really fun, man.
Excellent.
Really
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it as well. I had a place to say to the world all the things that I keep to myself.
Well, if you have more you want to say that didn't get said today, please let me know and we'll schedule another thing. And
Sure.
I'm going to be doing that also. I don't have a lot of people I can speak to that know all these kinds of things, you know. So you're now on my list.
I'm not an expert in any of this. I mean, I'm an expert in some technology. So if you want to talk technology, I can teach you all kinds of technological stuff.
I listened to what you said about TOC, and it's on the same level of what I know and what I heard from Eli Schragenheim and everything else, and what I heard from Eli Goldratt. So I would consider you an expert.
I try to read, reread, watch, rewatch everything I can get my hands on. So I bought all the books by everybody who wrote about TOC, and I read all of them more than once. And
in any case,
eventually it came to me.
yeah. And in any case, as described in TOC, don't trust the experts anyway. Doesn't matter if you're an expert.
Yeah,
You're not wrong just because you're not an expert, and you're not right just because you are an expert. Expertness doesn't matter. Yeah.
Well, it matters, but you shouldn't take that as a gospel.
Right. Yeah. We shouldn't have any gospel, I guess. Because gospel means you have the answers and you're not willing to reconsider them.
Yeah.
And I'm not even sure that there were any questions that were there. So, all right. Well, that's it then. Thank you, Evgeny.
Thank you, Rami. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.